Thanks very much, Matthew. Really nice to be with you all. My name's Father Stephen Wang. I'm really an AI hobbyist, not an expert or teaching or anything. I've taught philosophy for a number of years in London, so there's a lot of interest for me in all the bigger, kind of slightly more abstract questions, the mind, body, consciousness questions, if there's a super intelligence, could there even be a super intelligence? So just the questions about God and the soul and immortality that, as we heard earlier, are coming up from within the AI world. It's not Catholics jumping in to try and impose things. It's that after 40 years or 250 years of in the Enlightenment, really, that some of the deeper classical questions are coming back again. That's one of the things I find so exciting. But just a little anecdote, as it were. I'm currently rector of the Venerable English College, which is a seminary training English and Welsh priests here in Rome. And we were founded in a Reformation context. We were founded in 1579. And of course, the issue then for our missionary priests going back to England, what was the IT? It was the printing press. So the big question, and I'm not getting into polemics here, it was true for Protestants and Catholics, but the big question about mission, evangelization, the church, it was technology. It was movable type, the printing press, and the practical question for our young missionary priests, apart from first getting into the country safely without being killed and caught at the docks when you arrived, first was smuggling books in, or even better, famous St. Edmund Campion was creating a printing press that you could use as underground Catholics. And as some of you know, one of our greatest martyrs, St. Edmund Campion, he was caught because when he printed the famous Decem Rationis, that great apologetic tract, they were caught via the printing press. And that led them to the priests and to the whole mission. So just this little context, as it were, has raised for me lots of questions. As a rector forming young priests for mission and lay people indirectly, what's the equivalent today? Obviously, in some ways, it's AI. And what are the philosophical issues coming up through AI? But also, as we're beginning to hear now, what are some of these practical issues about how AI is impacting our mission? And that's exactly, I hope, what we're going to think about now. So just very happy to be here as the chair. So let me step out of the way to introduce Anthony Granado, Associate General Secretary at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Aaron Dominguez, Provost at the Catholic University of America, Sean Graeber, Chief Digital Officer at EWTN, the media group in the States, and Father Ricky Manalo, composer, author, and educator, and a Paulist Father. A really wonderful collection of very diverse perspectives. And I've just briefed them a tiny bit. I said you've got 3 or 4 minutes and 4 minutes maximum, and I'm going to ring a bell at 4 minutes, just to both present your own thoughts, and our topic here is the prophetic vision of AI for the church, the prophetic vision of AI for the church. So I've asked them both to think big and just to provoke us as a group. It doesn't have to be tidy. And also that either in your little introduction or through the discussion, we've got lots of time to respond to Father David's really thought-provoking ideas as well. So shall we just go down the line, 3 or 4 minutes, over to you, Anthony. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to build on something that was said earlier. There's been a lot of discussion about, at the beginning, the Holy Father's language that he's used about, we are at a change of age. And I think that is what we can look at with the developments in artificial technology. We're in a change of age. But there's another pontiff I want to look to who went through a similar experience with changes of economic thought and industrialization, and that's Leo XIII and his famous encyclical Rerum Novarum. As the Church is considered an expert in human history, our tradition has brought a lot of wisdom to some of these questions that hit us. And I thought from Leo, even looking at the economy in the time and in developments, he had this to say as words of caution, and like to phrase this perspective from the perspective of opportunities and challenges. And he said, "No strength and no artifice will ever succeed in banishing from human life the ills and troubles which beset it. If any there are who pretend differently, who hold out to a hand-pressed people the boon of freedom from pain and trouble, an undisturbed repose and constant enjoyment, They delude the people and oppose upon them, and their lying promises will only one day bring forth evils worse than the present. Nothing is more useful than to look upon the world as it really is, and at the same time seek elsewhere, as we have said, for the solace to its troubles. So he's responding to a utopian way of thinking about technology of the age. So this is a word of caution. And even drawing on Thomas, again, it has been raised here quite a bit, in his commentary in the Politics and in the Summa, he reminds us about both the highs and lows of human nature, those particularly since the fall, where he mentions about humanity. We've talked about neutrality of technology itself. But he said this, but if he, the human person, man, is without law and justice, he is the worst of all animals. So we have this ability for both justice and evil, and it's how we use this technology. And in the opportunity side, I'd like to draw very quickly on what the U.S. bishops have said in their 1986 pastoral letter, Economic Justice for All. And there the bishops reflected on economic thought, but I think it's equally important to discuss it in the sense of AI technology. The bishop said, our faith calls us to measure, and I'll paraphrase, technology not only by what it produces, but also by how it touches human life, and whether it protects or undermines the dignity of the human person. And they said this, and I would apply this to artificial intelligence. We judge any technological system, and I'm paraphrasing, by what it does for and to people, and by how it permits all to participate in it. The technology should serve people, not the other way around. And so I think we are at an inflection point, and through faith and reason and our engagement with society, with the technological sector, we have both opportunities and challenges. And there's just a few thoughts I've been thinking of since Father Stephen and I spoke, and so very appreciative of the many comments that have been reflected here today so far. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Aaron, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. Let me just tell you a little bit about Catholic University of America, what we're doing. And I think the question of, the prophetic vision of AI is, God is inviting us to participate in the creation of the future. That's what a prophetic vision is. And this vision, I think, is fulfilled not just through God's actions, but by our participation with him, essentially by our obedience to God in these actions. And that really kind of informs the way I look at how I run our university. So I'm the provost. I run the academic affairs of the university, in charge of hiring the faculty, in charge of the curriculum, the research centers. And it's a comprehensive research university with 12 schools. We don't just teach undergraduates, we perform research, we create knowledge, we create uncover new things that haven't been known yet by man. And in order to participate in God's plan, I need to have people who know how to do that. So it involves finding the right kinds of people to come and join in this project. It's the people. It's the people that I put together in these teams. And everybody agrees and understands this vision. And that's why they want to be there. They want to be participating in a project that understands what the human being, what the human person is, and to participate in God's plan while doing it. For me, that's the only way to actually get these things done. An interdisciplinary team has to have people in it that themselves interiorly are interdisciplinary in some way. You can't be an expert in all fields, but you can certainly try to expand yourself. For example, I just hired a bioethicist named Maureen Kondik to come join our university. She's a bioethicist. She studies human embryology, but she's also trained in philosophy and theology. Her brother's a theologian, and they co-wrote a book on the origin of life, the human person. And she's informed the presidents of the United States, the Pope, that she's a member of one of these pontifical societies here. She's helped change the laws in the United States in the Dobbs case through participating in an amicus brief. That kind of participation, whole person participation in God's plan in an academy is what we need to do. We need to be putting together teams of people who get that. For me, that's the way I see a future, is if we can be obedient to God's plan with people together who get it.
Thanks, Sean.
So wonderful to be here. I've obviously been thinking about this topic of what is the prophetic vision for AI in the church over the past several days. And I think there's a maybe more foundational question, which is what is the prophetic vision for the church in the era of AI? And one thing that maybe we haven't talked as much about yet today is the context in which all of this is unfolding. We saw during Father Baggett's presentation the image of Pope Francis with the Balenciaga coat and all of that. I was told last night that there's another video of Pope Francis performing this trick, where like the waiter pulls the tablecloth and all of the arrangements stay on the table. And these are kind of funny examples, but more serious examples abound. If you do a Google image search today for peacock, you see peacocks, like half of them, 60, 70% of them are AI-generated content. I was seeing the example of a cafe on Instagram that was showing all these amazing pastries, and they had these plot lines of the baristas falling in love with one another, and it was this sort of viral sensation, and it was a complete fabrication. Maybe some people knew that, maybe they didn't. But we live in this era, it's almost like a post-truth kind of an era. We think about this a lot as EWTN. We have a very vast news organization that covers the church all over the world, and we see in the news media the incredible lack of trust, and at least in the United States, I think this is likely true around the world as well, but tremendous lack of trust in institutions like the media and governmental institutions. We're obviously experiencing an election right now in the United States, extraordinary polarization. And so we have this environment where trust in the institutions and the fabric of society has eroded so much. And the question is, well, what is the opportunity for the church? I think is to continue to be a beacon of truth, to bear witness to the faith, instruct the faithful. And I think then the question becomes, well, how does AI contribute to that? Can AI contribute to that? And I think about this a little bit over two dimensions. One dimension is, what are the activities that AI can either take over or contribute to? And there are those activities that are really unique to the church, the administration of sacraments, the exercise of the magisterial sort of teaching authority. Those feel like really dangerous, in some ways dangerous areas for AI to make contributions because, unchecked, AI can say a lot of crazy things, which we've seen. And so, then there are more prosaic things, maybe financial management, other areas where AI can, play a role. I think, again, Father Baggett, you highlighted a number of areas in which AI can play a great role, translation and, making things more accessible. But maybe I can illustrate some of this by way of example. The other dimension is really the freedom with which we give AI to operate. I come into the Catholic world recently to EWTN, only just 4 or 5 months ago, from more secular tech. And the company that I worked at prior to EWTN was a company called Mapbox, where we built geospatial technology. We built in-dash navigation systems for companies like Rivian, Toyota, BMW. And we created a AI voice-based agent. You could say, hey, turn up the air conditioning, lower the windows, bring me to a sushi place. It was pretty cool. And as we built this, we had to sort of grapple with how much freedom do we give the AI? So when you gave it freedom, total freedom, it was magical. Like we were saying earlier, you have this really great experience. It's really interesting, but it also said some really weird things. And a lot of times it didn't do what we wanted to do. So we ended up then putting a lot of guardrails on it. But then when you put guardrails on it, you take away a little bit of the magic and you sort of reduce it. You're not taking advantage of the true generative capability of it to be creative and to, come up with new ideas. And so I think that there's this spectrum over which AI can operate. And it's somehow the intersection of what activities we feel AI can responsibly contribute to in the church, and then how much freedom we give the AI in contributing and being truly generative and maybe even in some senses creative, that I think provides a conceptual framework for how we can consider all of this. But again, I come back to this concept of truth, and I think that is the big opportunity for the church in this era of, again, erosion of trust in institutions. And also, I'll close by saying this, being at EWTN, our mission is to advance the truth as promulgated by the magisterium. So we're very closely aligned with the church in that sense. And we're a 43, 44-year-old organization. Obviously, we don't have the thousands of years of history that the church has, but there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that I feel, for instance, in maintaining that trust that we've earned from our audience over time. And it's like the old adage about canvas, it's very strong, but once you have that initial rip, the canvas rips quite easily. And so I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for us to leverage AI, but we need to be quite responsible about this because the trust and is really the main value that the church can bring in this era, and I think in a smaller way, certainly what we can do as a media organization as well.
Thanks, Sean. Father Ricky.
Thank you, Father Stephen. So when I looked at this question, it's going to help me prepare for a paper I'm going to give next year in Paris at a very geeky liturgical theologian gathering, and it's going to be looking at spatial intelligence and architectural and liturgy per se. When I think about prophecy, I think that's where we have to look at as far as the future. As the next frontier, actually, it might be agentic AI as far as agency, let's say, but actually it's going to be spatial intelligence. When I'm reading Fei Li's paper about this and how, if you can imagine holodecks, that's going to be the new way of teaching seminarians one day. I might be able to show the seminarians an Ambrosian octagonal baptismal font as if we're actually there. And right now we've been talking largely about large language models, but I think we need to also look at the future and the prophecy of that. So part of it also, I think that's where our liturgical heritage of liturgical sacramental theology and ritualization embodiment could actually complement and critique where we're heading. The second prophetic contribution that I think the Catholic Church could offer, we are, as been pointed out already, a worldwide network. We have great relationships with either nations or organizations or different even manufacturers. That's what's going on right now. In light of that, I've been reading the UN's statement governing AI for nations, I think, or governing AI for ethics or whatever that is. And what they were doing is they were trying to hold hands across many nations to look at the governing structure. So I thought, well, that's what the Catholic Church could also do if they want to really be prophetic. Not just come up with a statement about AI, and we could bring in what questions about ethics, what it means to be human and all of that, but perhaps an interreligious statement, because we are really one of the great religious traditions that could bring religions together. What might that look like? It could be a hybrid document in which each Muslims, Jewish, Protestant could give their contributions of what their concerns are, and as well as contributions individually, but at the same time, there might be a collective, there might be a collective response that could complement what the UN is already doing. And the third thing that I said, if we come up with any statements or any kind of formal guidelines or whatever, that still needs to be disseminated at a local cultural context. That was one of my majors, intercultural communication and how that comes down to what we call enculturation. For example, I'm going blank now, but the Rome call for AI that came out 4 years ago, while that could be revised, that still needs to be disseminated. How might a culture that might not be in the same economic, position as other nations, how might they receive that? So I'm a practical theologian that's kind of looking at how this actually gets disseminated and integrated to the local church context.
Thank you very much, all of you. Lots of really interesting speculation. At the moment, how are you seeing AI affect the mission of the church? Sean, you're touching on that a little bit in truth and the tools that it might be used through EWTN, but just, are any of the four of you or all four of you, are you seeing it actually impact the mission of the church so far in a way that we've had a little taste with Father David, or is that still a few years off? Any thoughts from anyone?
Okay. Well, one concrete example is that now we've started up just 2 weeks ago, it was approved by our academic senate, a new Masters of Science in Artificial Intelligence at the Catholic University of America, so a new educational program. And it'll be based and infused with the Catholic ethics and Catholic social doctrine. These students are engineers, but they take philosophy and theology. And so it will be integrated, not just, there is a class called Ethics in AI, but basically it should be, if we're doing it right, infused throughout the entire curriculum in an integrative way, the way that Catholic education would work. So that would be preparing future practitioners. These are people get master's degrees to go get jobs, not really to be professors. So that's our contribution as a university, is to educate people and to discover new things. So for us, that's one concrete thing we're trying to do. So giving them the actual technical tools on how to, understand what an artificial neural network is, write code, these types of things, but then to have the faith formation integrated into that.
I've been giving these webinars on AI to Catholic ministers, ranging from clergy to lay, catechists, and homilists. One of the things, they've been giving me feedback, and one of the things I've been receiving are the administrative, the quickness that Father Michael was talking about. So now priests could write a homily in 15 seconds, literally. Now the feedback I've been receiving as far as how it's impacting, all of a sudden, I'm not wrestling with the scriptures like a week or 3 days beforehand. And one of the things I've been advising them is how, even though it might save time, for some reason, at least in North America, we tend to fill in the time once again, and the addiction of how technology continues to override that. So it's affecting it as far as administrative skills, but we're always coming back to the age-old question of, even though it saves time or everything else, to the extent, how are we spiritually forming ourselves in our ministry at a very practical level?
Sean and then Anthony.
A few practical examples of how we're using this at EWTN, and actually a couple of areas where we've pulled back a little bit. We have affiliates all around the world, one of which is in Norway. We've grown the team a little bit, but for all intents and purposes, we have one person in Norway who is the EWTN affiliate. And he is able to have a website, publish news articles, have really a news organization, and he does all of this with AI. So he'll do something like take some of our English language programming, translate that into Norwegian, a transcript of a show, and then build that into news articles. Now, the caveat is that it's always checked by a human for the veracity of the translation and ensuring that everything sounds natural, which is not always the case when AI does the translation without human intervention. But that enables us to evangelize to the tens of thousands of Catholics and non-Catholics, I guess million or so non-Catholics in Norway and in broader Scandinavia. So for us, the efficiency that we gain as a result of these AI workflows that are, again, checked by humans is just amazing, because we can now reach this entire country. This individual also produced a documentary, which is an amazing story of someone who was with Maximilian Kolbe and had a personal story of that entire episode. And there's some archival interview footage, maybe a couple minutes. And what he managed to do is create a 15, 20-minute documentary supplementing those few minutes of real archival interviews with AI-generated video. Now, we haven't published this externally because we're still trying to grapple as an organization with how do we sort of do this well, and how do we message it in such a way that we're transparent and we continue to have the trust with our audience that they've come to expect of us. But it's remarkable. I mean, you watch this documentary, it's extraordinarily compelling, and it's virtually entirely AI-generated. I'll just give maybe one more quick example where we've actually decided not to go forward, and that's with the Bible. We're in the midst of evaluating our audio Bible options, and likely we'll record one and create one ourselves with various folks from EWTN. And we looked into, what if we use something like 11 Labs, which is an AI audio generation, voice generation. You can use their voices. You can, with a few minutes of speaking, train the AI to have your own voice in any language. And we tested this. We kind of listened to it as an executive team, and it just didn't feel right. I don't know that we have like a hard and fast rule of why it didn't feel right, but something about the inspired word of God being, spoken by this kind of robot thing, it just didn't feel right with, what we were trying to do. So it's been interesting to sort of, on the one hand, we see the impact on it, on this, on this country, and actually multiple countries. And in other areas, we're sort of testing the waters, but, trying to find out where are those boundaries of what we deem permissible for our organization and what we're trying to do.
Was it Anthony and then Aaron?
Yeah, so just practically speaking, looking at a couple areas where AI is coming up, US-based Caritas affiliates known as Catholic Charities have been implementing a pilot project to look at chatbots and how they can help with mental health response. So the bishops of the United States have been very much involved in the campaign on raising the issues around behavioral mental health concerns. And so these chatbots would be, the first encounter a person may have who might have some questions around mental health concerns. And of course, if something serious is seen through this process, the person is directed to a human being. But pilot project there. I sit on the board of Catholic Health Association in the United States as an observer, and the issue of care and AI, for example, care bots has come up. What are going to be the ethical implications of AI for healthcare? And it raises both practical questions when you're dealing with labor shortages and such, but also philosophical ones. And so that was discussed here earlier about we want to see that AI is supplementing and not substituting. So even though we have very practical areas where healthcare could use AI to assist, we also have to raise the question, are we substituting humans, for example, when our loved ones are seniors or in a care facility, and it's a care bot that's responding to them and not a person. At the Bishops' Conference in particular, we're beginning to have these discussions in the various committees about the philosophical, the legal, the regulatory implications of AI, technological developments, changes in law, and even the use of AI within our conference. Many of you are probably very familiar that there's a generative AI feature at the top of Google now. And so now we have to look at our own internal policy, because we generally are not favorable to use of generative AI within the conference proper. And so it's raising these very fast-moving questions that are very pragmatic, that is inspiring a lot of very excellent discussion amongst the U.S. Church.
Yeah, just another fun, interesting, concrete example. Over COVID, the dean of my business school decided to read the Summa Theologica. So he read Aquinas' works, and because he had nothing else to do, I suppose, over COVID. And out of the fruits of that, he and the recent graduate of our university have put together a code that basically encodes Aquinas' virtues, like a virtue diagram, a virtue tree, and have written an app called superhabits.app that allows a person to subscribe to this thing, and basically it encourages you and helps you perfect your virtues, and it's really quite good, and it's very theologically sound as well. That is just something totally new. That is not something that I would have envisioned 5 years ago at all, and it's now a reality. So I encourage you all to try superhabits.app.
Look, we're speaking about the prophetic stance of the church in terms of how the church can contribute and ride the wave. And I get the sense that most of the people in this room are boosters. But just to put in a little edge and get some conversation going over lunch, is any of the four of you, and then we'll maybe open up a little bit, you've touched on some of the questions about pulling back now and then. The town I happen to come from in England, St Albans, is at the very forefront of the anti-smartphone reaction for parents and schools. And it's the first town where universally the schools have banned smartphones because all the parents and teachers have got together. Now, you won't say it's a step back necessarily, but it's certainly a readjusting and a sense that some things have gone too quickly. So just, are any of you wanting to take the Catholic Amish option and propose that, in fact, one of the contributions, and we were hinting at this earlier, weren't we? Someone on my right here was saying one of the contributions the church can bring is to humanize it and remind people that in the world of virtual intimacy and relationships, that's meant to lead to something deeper. You've spoken about the chatbot carers. Okay, that could be a substitute, but it could be a way forward for someone who hasn't spoken to someone in 23 days because they haven't had a carer visit. Are any of you wanting to pull back or imagining an alternative society where the Catholic world, instead of being on the crest of this wave, which I think most of us are feeling here, is actually creating a kind of Benedictine option sub-community within Western culture or indeed other cultures? Just a little bit of speculation from you.
Well, I don't have a strict policy, but generally we don't allow cell phone usage and computer usage in the classroom, during classroom activities. I don't know if Professor Widmer does in his class or not, but we want to encourage human interaction. So if we're using technology, we want it to lead towards human interaction. That's That's the foundation of the Christian faith, in fact. That's why I can't text Father my confession yet. So it's when we're deploying this technology, at least at our university, we want to always keep an eye towards how do we make it such that the end result is more greater human flourishing through human interaction.
I'm kind of an optimist, when it comes to AI. I think, as far as like social media, the optimist says we've learned from that mistake as far as, the negatives that came out of that. It's a great book by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation, that talks about the ills of that. But that's because we've had 10 years of data to show, and most of the manufacturers and software workers, they didn't really have the governance because of our laissez-faire economic, U.S. culture. So part of me says, now that we know better, we are in a position to learn from that and do some of the things that we're talking about here, the prophetic implementation, and particularly our, the religious contribution to the larger AI world.
I for one, would certainly take a technological Benedict option. I think, the reality is I think these tools are really scary. And, there's sort of this tension, like the chief digital officer of EWTN, but the reality of EWTN is that we want people to go back to the parish, back to the sacraments. We have the Mass on TV every day. For a lot of people who are homebound, that is their parish. They watch the Mass with us every day. But, our preference obviously would be for people to meet one another in person. And so I think in the same way that digital can sort of, the virtual world, digital world can supplement, it's not a substitute. I think we need to really be quite circumspect about the ways in which we use AI and have the ultimate goal for it to amplify our humanity as opposed to replace it. But yeah, it's an interesting world that we're entering into here. I was going to quote The Anxious Generation as well. It's a wonderful book if you haven't read it, about the impact of digital on childhood.
Again, I am an AI optimist, just for the record, but as chair, I need to provoke a few more questions. One of the words that's here in our subtitle for this panel is the church's contribution to justice, and implicitly the possibility of injustice. We all know about these questions that are coming up about digital inequality, digital exclusion, and far worse. So just, I don't have to go down the line, but any thoughts from any of the four of our panelists about the risks in local or global injustice because of AI, and how, as a society or as a church, we respond to that? Thanks, Anthony.
I think that's a good question, and the church needs to be in the forefront of that discussion. The Holy Father has been bringing up the issue of the technocratic paradigm. I would not support a Benedict option for technology, but one that, from a realist perspective, as the church has said, she is an expert on human history, and there are some highs and there are lows when it comes to technological development if we just look at human history. And so, yes, we should be concerned about growing inequality. We already have now a situation where 15% of the Earth's population controls approximately 85% of the Earth's resources. Are we so utopian to believe that somehow we're going to magically change our thinking with a new technology such as AI? I'm doubtful of that. And so I think the church has to be at the forefront, putting the human person at the center of the discussion and encouraging, as I mentioned earlier, that all participate in a way that's consistent with the common good and the dignity of life of all people, that the people at the peripheries are part of the conversation. They're not just being talked to, but they're a part of the conversation. And I think the Holy Father has been right to raise those issues.
Any other thoughts about that exclusion, injustice?
Next, but 2 weeks ago, I was at this conference in D.C. It was about AI and law. So I was the only non-judge or non-lawyer there. But they talked about how, all manufacturers now have this golden carrot in front of them, and so they could bypass a lot of the ethical principles that, that we're built upon. So how do they, so my point is, how do we relay, the ethical standards or governance as they pursue this, or is it really a pursuit of one manufacturer beating the other towards the advancement? Because if they don't use it, they're not going to be able to advance themselves per se. How do we relieve those fears, but at the same time allow them to understand these larger existential questions?
For sure, in our area of the woods near Washington, D.C., there's quite a few large data centers that are being built in Virginia, and these require a tremendous amount of resources, power and cooling. And as the need for that type of power and cooling for the compute infrastructure, that we'll be redirecting resources towards that as a country, and putting them in places where you can kind of override the local people's desire to not have such a thing in their backyard. So we have to, I don't know that too many people are talking too much about that as part of the overall problem here, or situation.
I think the big question very often coming up in two words is who benefits, isn't it? Who benefits? As Anthony said, who are the stakeholders involved, not just in the use, but in the decision-making, the formation of these different tools. And just to make a little link, I'm sure most of you know this, that we're a tiny group meeting in the Vatican now. The main group meeting this month is the Synod on the Synod. So there's a profound reflection in the church about synodality and what it means to be a listening church, and maybe this idea of modeling for the world something. We're not always experts in this at all. We can model something about listening and listening to different stakeholders there. Father David.
The preceding question that you asked, Stephen, I think it's always been in the church and in society at large that people get involved and that people withdraw for human reasons. So you have the contemplative life. It's not a rejection of the world, but it's a focus on the essence of life, and even the essence of life of living with God. Lay people having done this, given up wealth to work with the poor at Dorothy Day in New York City, and so many examples around the world. And they both are prophetic. So one gets into the muck and figures it out as the world is running pell-mell forward and making observations and making mid-course corrections. And the others who withdraw to say, life is about something much more than what's happening on the playfield.
Thank you very much. Look, with Matthew's permission, we thought we've heard from 2 panels and 2 speakers this morning. Everyone else has been very attentive, slightly passive. So there's just a few extra minutes now to open things up to the floor. And please to make, I think, if that's all right, Matthew, any comments about anything that's come up this morning. Anything you've been dying to say, dying to contribute, maybe a question, but even more maybe just a thought. And I'm going to be a very strict chair. Can you keep this to 2 or 3 sentences? 30 seconds, not a 7-minute speech. It'd be really nice to hear from a few different people about their reactions to anything that's come up this morning, just to frame things before lunch. Cardinal Turkson.
So by way of responding to your thing about being prophets or prophetic vision and all, I think prophets announce, they denounce, and then they pronounce something for the future. In this sense, just like to share, by way of giving a small information, sometime next month, we'll be doing stuff here about how AI is used in courtrooms by judges pronouncing sentences. Okay, it's increasingly coming up that the use of AI by judges when they have to pronounce sentences sometimes do not favor, people in the docks, people and all of that. So we're going to be looking at that, and that's an instance of again, the church being a little bit proactive, drawing attention of society to the abuse, in this sense, of AI in the pronouncing of sentences in courtrooms.
A wave and a nod, and I hope that's pretty clear.
Thank you very much, Andreas Tonhauser, EWTN, based here in Rome. Thank you very much for this conference. It's very intriguing. One question actually that I was dying to ask the first panel, but maybe to the whole room or to the panelists of both panels. From a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the best, how ready do you see the church to, as we've heard, engage with the technology sector.
Would any of our 7 panelists like to just have a thought? We won't go around the whole panel. Any quick thoughts from a panelist? Father Eric, thanks.
Key to answer such a question, I would say the Vatican. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's very risky to answer such a question, but I would say the Vatican 7 or 8, and the bishops' conferences from, I would say, 1 to 5.
Let me keep the discussion flowing from the floor.
Louis Kim, I'm a VP at Hewlett-Packard working in AI and also a contributing editor at Comment Magazine. I have a question that probably will course the next 2 days, which is impact on industry. How can influence industry really take hold? And I wonder what we can learn for good or ill on movements like DEI, ESG, and other sort of movements that have coursed through industry that has changed how they behave.
I wanted to contribute to, with a little thought about the church and its communication leaders throughout Latin America. I have been able to travel throughout Latin America, especially Mexico, Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, and we have a very talented group of young people in the church in Latin America that are eager to continue learning about artificial intelligence and are devoted not only to learning, but to contribute good communications, which I think is one of the key issues we have to address regarding artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alessandro DeSanto from Hallow, Catholic Prayer App. While I am neither a theologian nor an entomologist, if I remember my sophomore year high school theology well, I believe prophet comes from the word mouthpiece, and I was very interested to see the prophetic vision as the definition in the question. I think it's important to realize that in acting as prophets or pursuing a prophetic vision, we are not ourselves providing the breath, right? We are called to bring into the world a voice that is the Spirit's. And I think if we lose sight of that, ultimately our prophetic visioning in the world, our building in the world, as ultimately channeling our vocation in a way that's a personal call, we get away from trying to understand our own image as in God's image and pursuing His will, and instead trying to create a God in our image. And I think that's particularly dangerous when it comes to AI. And so always kind of framing that understanding of to what end our own will or God's will is or at least for us, has been a helpful way of framing the particulars of the development, which are always unique in different situations.
Thank you. I've loved all the comments so far, and lots of good things to think about. I wonder, well, one of the things I hope we continue to discuss and flesh out more as the forum goes on and then beyond this is maybe it's not quite like the Amish in terms of what Catholic AI looks like, but I sense that whatever it does look like for Catholics to use AI or to develop it, that there will be something distinctive about it from the way it's developed outside of the church. And so I hope that we could maybe have more discussions around like what, not just its effects, like obviously we want it to be good for humans and assistive and some of those things, but even in the way it's developed and its kinds of capabilities and some of the distinctions we need to make between types of AI and its uses, whether it's narrow or general, or but even things like, I think there's even some more fundamental ethical dilemmas potentially, even in, like, for instance, the way a large language model is developed in the first place. So training that model, I think there are ethical questions that we haven't answered yet. It's using a lot of content that doesn't necessarily belong to it in order to learn and do these things. And so we're benefiting from all of that already. So that's just one example, but I think there are a lot of things like that that I think will start to open up the way Catholic Church can really contribute in a meaningful way to what is the difference between a human way of knowing or a machine's way of knowing. Is human creativity different from a machine's creativity? What does it mean to be a person? I think those sort of things will be distinctive ways that we contribute to the conversation and also figure out what does it look like to to practice AI as a Catholic.
I want to totally echo what Matthew just said, but to the panelists, you know, to speak of a prophetic vision for AI in the church, there is in Scripture an explicit reference by a prophet to giving an artifact the power of speech, and that's in Revelation 3:15. The beast gives itself its image, the power of speech. It even has the power of speech. And the beast is virtually indistinguishable from the lamb to the naked eye. You know, they both have mortal wounds. They both demand worship. They recovered from their wounds. I'm trying to distill everything here into 30 seconds. But, but wouldn't we have to say that it's a very dangerous miscalculation to attempt to discuss the ways in which the church just goes out and uses AI without understanding very comprehensively the anthropological, epistemological, and ultimately eschatological implications of what exactly artificial intelligence is. Because just as the beast is so indistinguishable to the naked eye from the lamb, or the works of Judas were so indistinguishable from the works of the beloved disciple and Christ, we are not just trying to engage this thing, this new product on the shelf called artificial intelligence. We're really dealing with counterfeit personhood. And it's not a bad thing in itself as a tool, right? It's my whole business is in this, right? So I'm not suggesting the Amish model by any means, but there might be a way for the Catholic Church to engage this profound question of counterfeit personhood with some other sort of AI, just like Apple has rebranded artificial intelligence is now Apple Intelligence. But really, what we should be focused on, I think, is ancillary intelligence, right? Because it's true, AI can abstract, but it can't love. And that's precisely the distinguishing factor between the beast and the lamb. And if we're not having these actual philosophical conversations, I think we're wasting a lot of time and getting beat by people who have a diametrically opposed vision of the human person. You're welcome.
And of course, those conversations are definitely a part of these 2 days. So we look forward to that. I've got someone behind me and then one more on the back row, and that's probably it.
Hello at the Foundation for American Innovation. So echoing some of the previous comments, I think we have to always acknowledge that these models are trained to be sycophants, not care about truth as much as making us pleased by how they sound or appear. And a good prophetic role is to make sure that we don't buy into some phantom capabilities, but correctly circumscribe what their actual capabilities are. And the church can help develop demarcations of what it means to actually be intelligent. So we know, hey, here's where a model is actually performing what it's supposed to do, and here's where it's fooling us. And by articulating this well, we can have positive use cases while avoiding buying into hype and hysteria.
Thank you. And can I just ask our last two on the back row and then on the left, just to keep it very short so we can finish for lunch. Thank you.
I'm Anton Kallela. I'm the global CEO of Moore, one of the big international accountancy consulting firms. It's not a reflection on AI, it's actually a personal reflection on this experience that it's becoming even clearer to me that in my role as a global CEO, where we're bringing AI to our clients, our people, that this is my vocation. God's calling to be here to bring that prophetic dimension here. And I think in all of us here, I can't speak for everybody here, but this experience is a reminder of our vocation. We are doing God's work in this just now in the world.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to draw this to a close, but it's a lovely thought to finish with. And remember, this is not a full stop. It's just a comma or a hyphen. It's continuing the discussion over lunch. But can I just, on all of our behalves, give a big thank you to Father David, to Anthony, Aaron, Sean, and Ricky.